Chapter 96. In the weeks that followed, she began to take her pad with her to the clinic where Frank was being cared for. A period of surgeries and interventions had given way to a routine of palliative care. He could get out of bed, and with help shuffle out into the clinic courtyard, a pleasant walled space dominated by a big shade tree, a linden. He would sit there looking up into the leaves and the sky. There were flower beds, well tended, but he never seemed to look at these. As far as Mary could tell, his ex and her daughter never came back to visit again. Once she asked him about it, and he frowned and said he thought they had come by once or twice, but he couldn't be sure when it had been. She even asked one of the nurses about it, and was told it was not information they could share, that she would have to ask him. It didn't matter. Acquaintances from the apartment co-op he had so briefly occupied came by, and friends from jail.
So he said.
Whenever she came by, he was alone, and seemed like he had been that way for the whole of that day, no matter when she came. It could have just been his manner, which was getting more and more withdrawn, but she began to think her impression was right. He was seldom visited. As his condition worsened, and he was more and more confined to his room, and even his bed, on an 4 drip of pain meds and who knew what else, she began to spend more and more time there. She realized that she believed, as much as she believed anything, that when someone was dying, it wasn't right that they be left alone, stuck in a bed, attended only sporadically by nurses and doctors. That wasn't proper. It wasn't human. It should never happen. And so she began to make his room her office. She brought in a music box, found a small chair she could borrow from the clinic to use as a footstool, added a pillow to the chair she sat in, to give her back more support. After that, she began every day with a quick breakfast in her safe house, filled a thermos with coffee, then went to the office to check in, then continued on to Frank's room. There she settled into her chair with her pad, started Miles Davis's Kind of Blue on the music box to announce her arrival, and got to work on her pad. If she had to make a call, she stepped out into the hall and spoke as briefly and quietly as she could. Her bodyguard detail, almost always Thomas and Sibylla, got comfortable in their own ways out in the clinic reception area. Their job had to be boring, she judged, but they did not complain. When she mentioned it, they just shrugged.
We like it that way, they said.
Better that way.
Hope it stays that way.
These days, Frank spent most of his time asleep. This was a relief to both of them. When he woke, he would stir, groan, blink and rub his eyes, look around red-eyed and confused. His face was swollen. He would see Mary and say, "Ah." Sometimes that was all for minutes at a time. Other times he would ask how she was doing, or what was happening, and she would reply with a quick description of the latest news, especially if it pertained to the refugee situation. If it was about Switzerland in particular, she read to him off her pad, so he could get as much information as there was. Otherwise, she gave him her impressions. Most of the time he slept, uneasily, fitfully.
Drugged.
Sometimes he lay still, but often he shifted restlessly, trying to find a more comfortable position. Sometimes he would come to suddenly and seem fully awake, although eyeing her from a great distance. Once when he was like this, he said out of the blue, "Now you've got me kidnapped." She growled at that, a little nonplussed. "A captive audience is never very satisfying," she replied at last, trying to keep it light. "You could help me escape. That's what I'm doing." "You're not very good at it." "Well, you're in maximum security here." "Still visiting me in jail then?" "'Fraid so." Another time he woke and stared at her, then knew her and where he was. He said quietly, "I'll be sorry not to see what happens next." "It sounds like things are getting interesting." "I think so.
But,
no one will live long enough to see an end to it." "More trouble coming?" "For sure." She looked at her inbox. She would have to scroll down for a couple of minutes to get to the bottom of it. Something this big is going to go on for years and years. Centuries. Exactly. He thought it over. Even so, the crux, you called it once. The crux is a crux. You might see an end to that anyway. She nodded, watching him. Instinctively, she always shied away when he talked about his death. She recognized that fear in her, that some barrier would crack and they would fall together into an unbearable space. But she had learned to stay quiet and let him go where he would. There was no point in keeping someone company if you wouldn't follow them where they wanted to go. This time, he fell asleep while still formulating his next thought. Another time when she walked in, he was already awake, sitting up and agitated. He saw her and reached out for her so convulsively, she thought he might fall off the bed. "I just jumped through the ceiling," he exclaimed, wild-eyed. "I woke up and I was standing on this bed, and then I jumped up through the ceiling, right up there."
Pointing up.
"But then I still couldn't get away. I tried to, but I couldn't. I fell back down, and then I found myself here again. But I jumped right through the ceiling." "Wow," Mary said. "What does it mean?" he cried, transfixing her with his look, his face vivid with dismay and astonishment. "What does it mean?" "I don't know," she said immediately. She reached out and touched his hand, both twining her fingers with his and shifting him back toward the middle of the bed. "Sounds like you had a vision. You were trying to get out of here." "I was trying to get out of here," he agreed. She let go of him and sat in her chair. "It's not time yet," she ventured.
"Damn," he said.
"You're a very strong person." "So, I should be able to do it," he objected. She hesitated. "Well," she said, "it cuts both ways, I guess. It wasn't your time yet." He stared at her, still completely rattled. Of course, to have a real vision, to hallucinate, to try to fly out of this world, it was bound to be upsetting.
She didn't know what to say.
Now he was weeping, looking right at her still, tears rolling down his cheeks. Seeing it, she felt her eyes go hot and tears well up. Something leaping the gap from face to face, some kind of telepathy, some primate language older than language. It was like seeing someone yawn, and then yawning yourself. What could you say? She tapped on the music box and got kind of blue going. Their theme music now, this album, flowing along in its intelligent conversation. She sat back in her chair, let the familiar riffs flow over them together. She reached out, and they held hands for a while. He clutched her hand from time to time. After a while he relaxed, fell asleep, and was deeply out the rest of the day. Another day, struggling unconscious on his bed, writhing even, he suddenly came up from under, as if to breathe, and saw her there and turned his head aside, pained somehow. He was drugged, confused, only semi-conscious, if that. Out of that condition, she heard him mutter, "It's only fate. It's only fate." She stared at him. His face was sweaty, both bloated and drawn at the same time. His breathing was labored. He pulled in air with desperate heaves, as if he could never get as much as he needed. When she was sure he was fully out, she said, "My friend, there is no such thing as fate." Then one morning she came in, and there were 2 hospice nurses in there, women attending to him, but no, cleaning up the scene. One looked up and saw her and said, "I'm sorry, he's gone." "No," Mary said. That one nodded at her. The other shook her head. The one who had spoken said, "They often slip away when no one's around. Seems like some of them want it to be that way. A kind of privacy, you know." She was not upset, as far as Mary could see. Not even alarmed. This was her job. She helped people at this point of life, helped them get to the end with a minimum of pain and distress. Now this one was gone. Mary nodded absently, regarding Frank's still face. He looked to her like he had when he was sleeping. She had been coming by for 2 months. Now he was very still. She took in a big breath, felt herself breathing, felt her heart beating. She was confused. She had thought there would be a struggle, a final clutch at life. She had thought it always went that way. As if she knew anything about it. It had been a long time since she had attended a death, and there hadn't been that many. "We can take care of him now." Mary nodded. "Give me a moment with him," she said. "Of course." They left. Mary arranged his stiff curled hands on his chest. They were cold, his chest was still warm. She leaned over and kissed him very lightly on the forehead. Then she picked up her pad, put it in her bag with the rest of her things, and left him. She walked out of there and wandered over to Bahnhofstrasse and turned toward the lake. She walked the handsome, prosperous streets of Zurich both sightlessly and seeing things she hadn't noticed in years. Minds skittering, feelings blank. The chipped, heavy stone blocks that formed the buildings flanking Bahnhofstrasse. They were amazingly regular geometrical objects, not perfect, lightly pocked and knobbled to give the faces of the buildings texture, but regular in that too, and set so perfectly that it was hard to imagine the process that would manage to accomplish it. In the end, it had been the human eye, the human mind. Swiss precision. Buildings from a time when stonemasons still did most of this kind of construction by hand. Artists of a very meticulous aesthetic, maybe even fanatics. Monomaniacs of cubical form.
Stolid. Permanent.
Many of these buildings had been here since 1400. Their stonework repaired probably in the 19th or 20th century, but maybe not. Maybe set in stone for good. Unlike a human life. A mayfly thing. A wisp of smoke.
Here then gone.
Frank May was gone. Well, now she would never wake up one night to find herself being murdered by him. She shook off that thought, shocked by it. The one who lives longest wins.
No. No.
Never again, his spiky rebukes. The pleasure in an alpine day, the rare moment of peace, the dark brooding anger, the ceaseless, useless remorse. He was released from that at last. 30 years carrying that burden, manifesting whenever he let down his guard. A PTSD sufferer. If that was really the way to think of it, weren't they all post-traumatic in the end? So that it was just a way of pathologizing being human? Martin had died on her just like Frank. Hospice bed, painkillers, suffering through the final breakdown of his body's functions, the end of his life, at age 28, when they had only been married 5 years. Wasn't that trauma? It most definitely was. She could see all that as if it were yesterday, and of course sitting with Frank had brought it all back in ways she hadn't felt for years. So wasn't she post-traumatic too?
Yes.
But PTSD meant someone whose trauma had been brutal? But death was so often brutal. Violent? That too. Shocking, bloody, premature, evil? Something cruel and unusual, so that the person who survived it couldn't get it out of their minds, kept having flashbacks to the point of reliving the experience, as in some nightmare of eternal recurrence?
Yes.
Maybe it was a matter of degree. Everyone was post-traumatic, it was universal, it was being human, you couldn't escape it. Some people had it worse, that was all it came down to. They were haunted by it, stricken, disabled. Sometimes it was bad enough they killed themselves to get free of it. Not uncommon at all. What a thing. Death and memory. Martin had been young, he had struggled against death with a kind of furious resistance, with a sense of injustice. Right to the end, he was never reconciled to it. Long after he had lost consciousness for the last time his body had fought on, the lizard brain in the cerebellum rallying every last cellular spasm to the cause. Those last hours of labored, gasping breaths, what used to be called the death rattle, would never leave her. It had gone on too long. She seldom thought of that. She had learned to forget most of the time. This was the key, maybe, that ability to forget, but she dreamed of it sometimes, woke gasping, and then remembered, as of course she always would. One didn't forget, but rather repressed. Some kind of boxing up or compartmentalization. What that meant inside the brain and the mind she had no idea. Somehow they managed not to think of certain things. Maybe that was what PTSD was, the inability to do the work of forgetting or of not recalling. Not working at all for her now, she had to admit. The trigger in her brain had been pulled, and she was shot. Poor Martin. She wandered in an abreaction through this handsome stone city that she quite loved. Remembering Martin. It wasn't so hard when she let herself. In fact, it was easy. How she had loved him. Ah, Zuri Zuri, my town, my town. Some old poem from her German class. This was her town. Martin and she had lived in London, in Dublin, in Paris, in Berlin. Never in Zurich or anywhere in Switzerland. She loved it for that. Really, she was very fond of this town. She even loved it. The way they could make her laugh with their Swissness. Their stoicism. Their insistence on order suffused by intense feelings of enthusiasm and melancholy. That peculiar, unnameable combination that was a national effect, a national style. It suited her. She was a little Swiss herself, maybe. Now aching with old pain, heartsick at the loss of someone gone now 44 years. She wandered the narrow medieval streets around Peterskirch and the Zughoskeller. There was the candy shop where Frank had bought them candied oranges, proud of them, how good they were, How much an example of Swiss art at its finest. Down to the lake. She headed toward the park with the tiny marina below it, intent on visiting the statue of Ganymede and the eagle. Ganymede perhaps asking Zeus for a ride to Olympus. It wouldn't be good when he got there, but he didn't know that. The gods were godlike. Humans never prospered among them. But Ganymede wanted to find out. That moment when you ask life to come through for you. It was so hard to imagine that a mind could be gone. All those thoughts that you never tell anyone, all those dreams, all that entire pocket universe. Gone. A character unlike any other character. A consciousness. It didn't seem possible. She saw why people might believe in souls. Souls popping in and out of beings, in and out, in and out. Well, why not? Anything might be true. All things remain in God. Some saint's line, then Yeats, then Van Morrison, the way she knew it best. All things remain in God. Even if there was no God. All things remain in something or other. Some kind of eternity outside time. As she stood there above the little marina, she heard a roar, saw smoke across the lake to the left. Ah yes, it was Sexalotten, the third Monday of April. She had completely forgotten. Saxalut, to put it in Schwizzerdutch. The guilds had marched in their parade earlier, and now a tall tower erected in the Sexalottenplatz had been set on fire at its bottom. Stuck on top of the tower would be a cloth figure of the Bug, the Swiss-German bogeyman, his head stuffed with fireworks that would explode when the fire reached them. The time it took for this to happen would predict whether they would have a sunny summer or a rainy one. The shorter it took, the nicer the weather would be. Mary hurried across the Quaybruck to Berkelplatz, past the squeak and squeal of the trams over their tracks. If the Bug went fast, she wouldn't get there in time. Had to hope for a bad summer if she wanted to see the fireworks burst out of its head. She got there sooner than she thought it would take. The Platz was jammed with people, as always. The cleared circle they kept around the burning pyre was smaller than any other people would have kept it. The Swiss were strangely casual about fireworks. Their Independence Day in August was like a war zone. Some kind of wanton pleasure in fireworks. In this case, they were at least going to go off well overhead, as opposed to August 1st when they were shot off by the crowd into the crowd. The tower in the center of Sexalottenplatz was about 20 meters high, a flammable stacking of wood and paper. On top, the humanoid big-headed figure of the Bug, ready to ignite. The crowd was thick to the point of impenetrability. Mary was as close as she was going to get. Then the Bug went off. A fairly modest explosion of colored sparks bursting from out of the head of Winter's monster. Some booms. Then fireworks pale in the late afternoon light, then a lot of white smoke. Giant cheer from the crowd. The smoke drifted off to the east. She walked over to the lakeshore, just a few blocks from her schwimmbad. It was near sunset. She could see 3 ridges to the south. First the low green rim of the lake, then the higher, darker green ridge between them and Zug. Then in the distance, far to the south, higher than the world, the big triangular snow-splashed peaks of the Alps proper, now yellow in the late light. Alpenglow. This moment. Zurich. Chapter 97. There are about 60 billion birds alive on Earth. They've been quicker than anyone to inhabit the re-wilded land and thrive. Recall they are all descended from theropods. They are dinosaurs still alive among us. 60 billion is a good number, a healthy number. The Great North Tundra did not melt enough to stop the return of the caribou herds to their annual migrations. Animals moved out from the refuge of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska and repopulate the top of the world. In Siberia, they're establishing a Pleistocene park and reintroducing a resuscitated version of the woolly mammoth. This has been a problematic project, but meanwhile the reindeer have been coming back there, along with all the rest of the Siberian creatures, musk oxen, elk, bears, wolves, even Siberian tigers. In the boreal forest to the south of the tundra and taiga, wolves and grizzlies have prowled outward from the Canadian Rockies. This is the biggest forest on Earth, wrapping the world around the 60th latitude north, and all of it is now being returned to health. It's the same right down to the equator, and then past the equator, south to the southern ends of the world. Certain inhospitable areas everywhere had been almost empty of humans all along. Now these have been connected up by habitat corridors, and the animals living on these emptier lands are protected and nourished as needed. Often this means just leaving them alone.
Many are now tagged, and more all the time.
There is coming into being a kind of internet of animals, whatever that means. Better perhaps to say they are citizens now, and have citizens' rights, and therefore a census is being taken. Watersheds upstream from cities are adopted by urban dwellers who observe their fellow citizens from afar, along with making occasional visits in person. Wild animals' lives and deaths are being noted by people. They mean something, they are part of a meaning. Not since the Paleolithic have animals meant so much to humans, been regarded so closely and fondly by we their cousins. The land that supports these animals also supports our farms and cities as well, in a big network of networks. What's good is what's good for the land. There are fewer humans than before. The demographic peak is in the past, we are a little fewer than we were before, and on a trajectory for that to continue. People speak now of an optimum number of humans, some say 2 billion, others 4. No one really knows. It will be an experiment. All of us in balance, we the people, meaning we the living beings in a single ecosystem, which is the planet. Fewer people, more wild animals. Right now that feels like coming back from a time of illness. Like healing, like getting healthy. The structure of feeling in our time. Population dynamics in play, as always. Maybe that makes us all living together in this biosphere, some kind of superorganism, who can say. In a high meadow, wild bighorn sheep. Their lambs gambol. When you see that gambling with your own eyes, you'll know something you didn't know before. What will you know? Hard to say, but something like this. Whether life means anything or not, joy is real. Life lives, life is living. Chapter 98. Notes for Mary's last meeting, taken for Badham again. All in attendance except Esteban, who is in Chile. Also Tatiana, of course. Someone took away her chair. All stand as Mary comes in late. Mary shakes head. People please.
Sit.
Let's get down to business, there's things to do. We laugh at her. First pleasure, then business. Retirement cake on coffee table, etc. A little party, quick and subdued, as Mary obviously doesn't like it. She adjusts to the idea as people toast her with coffee.
Changing of the guard, she says.
The winter general, handing things over for the spring charge, etc.
Toasts.
Awkward. Then everyone to their usual places around the table. Mary convenes meeting, looking relieved. All right. Thanks for that. Yes, I'm retiring. Going emerita. Very happy Badham has agreed to take over. The Secretary General and all other relevant parties have agreed to this and have named him acting minister. I'll be trying to see to it that they make it a permanent appointment. That would be good for all. Badham thanks her. Looks at her as he always does. Mongoose regarding Cobra. She likes that he regards her as a problem to solve. Still. Want to stay involved, but without messing things up. Ambassador for the ministry, agent at large, that kind of thing. Available for whatever. Janice Athena, staying on as minister? People laugh. Jay smiles briefly at Badham to indicate joking, but several are nodding. Badham among them. He says, at least go to the San Francisco meeting for us. I think you need to do that one. I'm done. It's your turn now. Everyone has to do what they can in their time. Then it's time to pass it along. All of you will get to this point sooner or later. Hanging on too long never good. I may have done that already. But you're all young. Me, I'm done. I'm around if you need me. I'll stay in Zurich. Professor at the ETH, and so on. Badham, you'll always be welcome. In fact, we need you. Mary smiles. I doubt that. But it's all right. It's time. Chapter 99. We're here today to discuss whether any of the so-called totalizing solutions to our current problems will serve to do the job.
No.
I suppose I have to ask, do you mean no to the question or no to the topic? No to the question. There is no single solution adequate to the task. And so what can we expect to see? Failure. But assuming success, just for discussion's sake, what shape might that take? The shape of failure. Expand on that, please. A success made of failures? Yes. A cobbling together from less than satisfactory parts. A slurry, a bricolage. An unholy mess. Will this in itself create problems? Of course. Such as? Such as the way like-minded people working to solve the same problem will engage in continuous civil war with each other over methods, thus destroying their chances of success. Why does that happen, do you think? The narcissism of small differences. That's an odd name. It's Freud's name. Means more regard for yourself than for your allies or the problems you both face. Well, but sometimes the differences aren't so small, right? The front is broad. But don't you think there's a real difference in, for instance, how people regard the market? There's no such thing as the market. Really? I'm surprised to hear you say this. What can you mean? There's no more of a real market behind what we now call the market than there is gold behind what we call money. Old words obscure new situations. You think this happens often?
Yes.
Give us another example. Revolutions don't involve guillotines anymore.
Alas.
You think revolutions are less visible now?
Exactly.
Invisible revolutions, technical revolutions, legal revolutions. Quite possibly one could claim the benefits of a revolution without having to go through one. But doesn't already existing power resist revolutionary changes? Of course, but they fail. Because who holds power? No one knows anymore. Political power is itself one of those fossil words, behind which lies an unknown. I would have thought oligarchies were pretty known. Oligarchic power is the usual answer given, but if it exists at all, it's so concentrated that it's weak. How so? I must say you amaze me. Brittle, fragile, susceptible to decapitation. By which I mean not the guillotine type of decapitation, but the systemic kind, the removal from power of a small elite. Their situation is very unstable and tenuous. It's highly possible to shift capital away from them, either legally or extrajudicially. Just capital? Everything relies on capital. Please don't be stupid. Who has capital, how it gets distributed? That's always our question. And how does it get distributed? People decide how it gets distributed by way of laws. So change could happen by changing the laws, as I've been saying all along. Or you could just shift some account numbers, as happened in Switzerland.
Ah, yes.
The banks. That reminds me of a fine story. Do you remember what the bank robber Willie Sutton said when a reporter asked him why he did what he did? I do.
Good of you to ask.
And good of that reporter too. The reporter said, "Why do you rob banks?" And Sutton replied, "Because that's where the money is." Chapter 100. She took an overnight train to Montpellier, slept the sleep of the blessed. Her ship left that evening, so that day she wandered the city's big old plaza, then the line of new Doric columns running from the plaza toward the harbor. Then onto an ocean clipper, sleek, seven-masted, looking like a cross between a schooner and a rocket ship laid on its side. On board to sleep again. When she woke, they were at sea. Every surface of the ship was photovoltaic or piezoelectric or both. Its passage through the waves, its very existence in the sun, generated power, which got sent to the props. With a good wind filling the big sails, and the kites pulling from far overhead, tethered to the bow, they could fly on the thing's hydroplanes. 100 kilometers an hour felt really fast. Next morning they surged through the Pillars of Hercules and out into the Atlantic. Some vague memory of Tennyson's poem Ulysses, a kind of Victorian Homeric ode to retirement, to live, to fight, to strive, to something, and not to yield. Brit love of heroic death, charge of the Light Brigade, Scott in Antarctica, World War I. A sentimentalism very far from Irish, although the Irish had their own sentimentalities, God knew. Into the open sea, leave behind the sight of land. The blue plate of the ocean.
Sea and sky clouds.
Pink at dawn, orange at sunset. Winds pushing and pulling them, the sun, the waves. The glorious glide, crest to trough, trough to crest, long rollers of mid-ocean. How had they forgotten this? She recalled her last flight from London to San Francisco, passing over Greenland at midday, no clouds below them, the great ice expanse as alien as Callisto or Titan, and everyone with their window shades pulled down so they could watch their movies. She had looked out her window and then around at her fellow passengers, feeling they were doomed. They were too stupid to live. Darwin Prize, grand winner. The road to dusty death. Here, now, she stood at the taffrail of a seven-masted schooner, a craft that could maybe be sailed solo or by the ship's AI. AI-assisted design was continuously working up better ships, as with everything, and solutions were sometimes as counterintuitive as could be kites, masts curving forward, but of course human intuition was so often wrong. Foxing their own cognitive errors might be one of the greatest accomplishments of contemporary science, if they could really do it. As with everything, if they could get through this tight spot, they might sail right off into something grand. A stop at Havana, handsome seaside city. Beautiful monument to the communist idea. Then to Panama, through the canal, and up the sunny Pacific to San Francisco. They sailed under the Golden Gate Bridge on a cold, cloudy day, the marine layer so low that the orange bridge was invisible, like a return to the bridgeless time. Then into their appointed wharf and onto land again, feeling its unsteady steadiness. Walking in hilly San Francisco, the most beautiful city in the world. Time for a last bit of work. She had agreed to Badham's request to represent them one last time at the CCCB. They met again at the top of the big tower, and again Mary was distracted by the city below and Mount Tamalpais and the Farallones poking blackly over the western horizon. Most of the same people were there, including the Chinese finance minister. Again Mary found her cheerful and articulate, one of the most powerful people in China. Hoping, she said when introduced, to find more that could be done to crank the great turn. Dynastic succession for the whole world, she suggested with a smile. Jane Yablonsky asked her what she had in mind. Chan spoke of equity, getting better in China and the world, but still far from achieved. She spoke of income floors and ceilings, of land taxes and habitat corridors, of the world as a commons, one ecosphere, one planet, a living thing they were all part of. Looking at the central bankers listening attentively to her, Mary saw it again. These people were as close to rulers of the world as existed. If they were now using their power to protect the biosphere and increase equity, the world could very well tack onto a new heading and take a good course. Bankers. It was enough to make her laugh, or cry. And yet by their own criteria, so pinched and narrow, they were doing the necessary things. They were securing money's value. They still told themselves, which in this moment of history required that the world get saved. She had to smile. She couldn't help it. Saved by fucking bankers. Of course the whole world was making them do it. Now they were discussing other new ideas, experiments beyond anything she had ever dreamed of. Minister Chan was now smiling, sweetly but slyly. It seemed because she had looked over at Mary and seen Mary's little smile. The two of them were complicit in their amusement. Both were amused that Chan herself would be taking the helm here and heading off in new directions. It was so amusing that when someone asked Mary what she and her ministry might think of all these new ideas for reform that Madame Chan was proposing to them, Mary stood to extend her hand toward the young Chinese woman and smile at her and say, "I yield the floor, I pass the torch, I like all of these ideas. I say, be as bold as you can dare to be."